meeting of 2020. Again, thank you for joining, making the time to be here today. Of course, these meetings aren't required. Probably for many of you, this is outside of your scope of your day-to-day work. But because of the nature of watershed work, you all have a really important role here. And these meetings are the main way that we can all get together around this common goal of safe and clean waterways. So a little bit of background for in case some people aren't completely familiar with what we're doing here. We focus specifically on the Curry's Fork watershed. As you can see on this map on the left, the Curry's Fork watershed is completely within the boundaries of Oldham County. This map on the right, this is our water health assessment map of Oldham County, and it has all of our main streams or our blue line streams in the county. This map is basically showing which of our streams meet water quality standards and which don't. The color scheme is fairly intuitive, with red being streams that don't meet water quality standards, yellow being streams that have some problems, and then green being streams that do meet water quality standards. So these streams down here, this little grouping at the bottom, these streams are the streams that are in the Curry's Fork watershed. So all of our streams in Curry's Fork watershed don't meet water quality standards, which is a big reason we have this program. This program started in the early 2000s through Oldham County Fiscal Court, and it started by working to identify some of the issues and come up with a plan to fix our water quality issues. And in short, my job as watershed coordinator is to coordinate these efforts to improve our waterways. So I'm happy to discuss more of this anybody offline, but at least for now, we're on kind of the same playing field to move forward with. So our technical advisory committee, this is our stakeholder group for the program, charged with providing technical expertise, knowledge, guidance, and leadership for implementing the Curry's Fork Watershed Plan. So of course, as I'm writing a grant or trying to develop a program or bring in partners, the TAC is really essential in getting guidance. But what I really want us to remember is that that's just a piece of it. So the work that you do in your capacities is, I would argue, more important. And I know that many of you are already doing this, but I would just encourage this group to find ways in incorporating water quality initiatives into your work. So I've mentioned this in past meetings that my goal is to create continuity with this group. So providing input can be really challenging if you don't have all the information, and there's a lot of information to know about what we have going on. So a big part of that continuity is these meetings, which we're trying to do at least 3 times a year. And now we'll do our attendance. So if you can put your name and your organization in the chat box. We want to count everybody as being here, but we can only count those of you that aren't spending federal dollars to be here as match. So if you are getting paid through federal dollars, just put like an F or an FED next to your name. I can't see the chat right now, but I'll wait a minute. I think that makes sense. Okay, so if you haven't had a chance to see our meeting agenda, I'm gonna start off the meeting by discussing a few things. I wanna start by going over the highlights of our grant we completed this year. Then I'll talk about the status of the current funding we have, and then the projects this fall, as well as what we have planned for this next spring. And then when I'm done talking, and hopefully not sooner, you'll be ready to hear from somebody else. And I'm really excited for the presenters we have today. Paul Cappiello from UDEL will talk about low impact and wildlife conservation at UDEL Botanical Gardens. And then Brooke Shireman and Andy Amon from SD1, Sanitation District 1, they're going to talk about how they've optimized their stormwater program. And then we'll have some times for questions and discussion. As we're going along, if you have questions, you are more than welcome to put those in the chat, and I'll take a look at those. And then if we have time between my talk and Paul, we'll give a couple minutes to discuss and ask questions as well. So first part here, summary of our completed grant. Really excited, we finished a grant, and that was wrapped up this year. All of the funding for this program comes through the Division of Water. Originally, the funding comes through federal dollars through the Clean Water Act. That comes to the Division of Water, and then they have this non-point source implementation grant program, and that's the grants that we've been applying for and has funded this work. So this grant was called the Onsite Wastewater Program / Stream Restoration Design Project. The time period for this project was June 1st, 2017 to September 30th, 2020. And I'll just kind of run through the highlights of this program. We had our on-site wastewater cost share program, had stream conceptual designs completed, installed stream crossing signs, did a rain barrel and native plant project, focused on some stormwater efforts through a stormwater management seminar, and had an assessment done of our streams. And then community engagement and marketing. The Watershed Plan has always and will always be a really big and important effort in the work that we do. So the main on-the-ground effort of this work has gone towards repairing or replacing septic systems. This will continue to be the main bulk of our on-the-ground effort. If you recall back to a TAC meeting we had last April, that was suggested by this group, and based on the Watershed Plan, we decided to keep moving forward to try to hit different areas with our on-site wastewater cost share program. It's a really effective way to get work done on the ground and really impact individual homeowners. So this program is a collaboration with the health department. We really rely on the health department to provide inspections, provide education to homeowners, education to us, expertise, and overall coordinate getting this work done. This area on this map here, the upper Asher's Run sub-watershed was our target area for this program. This was based on having not just high levels of bacteria, but also based on septic systems, failing septic systems being the highest likelihood, the highest cause of those high bacteria levels. And just running through our results, so we had a total of 9 education workshops, 1 big workshop at the beginning of the program, and then some individual workshops later on. This we had about 100 people in the community participate in these workshops. From that, we had 37 inspections that only had the inspection, so meaning they had the inspection, their system was good. And then we had 20 either repairs or replacements of septic systems that were completed, and 3 septic system pump outs. So the other half of that project title was beginning this process of stream restoration. So we did this by having conceptual designs completed. This map here is our stream restoration priority map. So we refer to this in terms of identifying where we want to have these stream conceptual designs completed. If you can see this map, each of these locations have a BMP number. So that number corresponds to our Watershed Plan best management practices. We have a list of 60+ main practices or solutions that we are looking to implement to overall implementing all of those will improve water quality. So these are the ones that are specific to stream restoration. And so these are the sites. We had 4 sites that were part of this conceptual design process. Again, high priority stream sites. We had one that was in North Fork, Curry's Fork, going south from 71, this long stretch here. Then we had 3 in South Fork, Curry's Fork, one where South Fork converges with North Fork. This other one here is behind Centerfield Elementary School and then runs south going past Highway 393. This last one here, and those are, so technically it's 5 BMPs and four sites. That's why you've got these different numbers. So this last one here isn't in the watershed plan, but OSEA came forward to identify that they had a bank that they had concerns about along their lagoon at the Lakewood Valley Wastewater Treatment Plant. So we were able to include that in this conceptual design process. And in terms of our next step, so each of these had a little bit different result and recommendations that we were given to move forward. So this stretch on North Fork, Curry's Fork, as well as this smaller one on South Fork that converges with North Fork, these ones, the recommendation was to pursue our in lieu fee program. That's a program with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Resources. I mentioned this, I think, a couple meetings ago, and to try to come in, and that would involve full-scale stream restoration on these sites. So next steps would be starting to pursue that and engage with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. For this Centerfield site, it was recommended that we create a wetland complex on the school. The school has a lot of property, includes South Fork, but also includes a big wide open area that's currently mowed. So the option of creating a wetland site would be really unique and a good idea for that site. And then on the Lakewood site, it was recommended to install a bioengineered rock toe along that bank. We provided that recommendation to OSEA. So for some other things we've done over the past year, this was really exciting. We had stream signs, stream crossing signs installed. So there was 18 signs installed along main roads, all distributed throughout the watershed. And these were installed last summer. So if you had a chance to drive around the watershed, maybe you've seen these. I know that people have been seeing them and associating now, you know, this is, I'm in South Fork or North Fork, or understanding more of the streams that are around them, and that's really great. And then we've done this rain barrel and native plant project. This was a collaboration with the LaGrange Welcome Center, installed 2 rain barrels and then a total of 650 square feet of native plants. I encourage everyone to go check out that site if you can. It'll look better in the spring now that we're getting into the dormant season, but this fall it looked really great. We've had these 2 rain barrels installed. Like I said, these were painted by a couple of students in the area, and they look really awesome. And this whole project is looking really good, and I'm excited to see what happens with it. I've mentioned before, so this site, the LaGrange Welcome Center, is actually technically outside of the Curry's Fork watershed, literally on the other side of the train tracks. But we got permission from Division of Water to do this project because of the visibility of the Welcome Center and their interest in the project. In terms of stormwater management, I've been working with the engineering department to start the process that will eventually lead to updating requirements for detention basins. So we're following the lead of SD1, who has already updated their program. I mentioned Brooke and Andy are going to talk about that later on. And we've also enlisted Bob Hawley, who had worked with SD1 during their transition as well. So this first step here was to bring in the development community, begin the outreach and training process. So last fall, Bob gave a presentation titled Tailoring Stormwater Management to Oldham County Streams. We had 28 professionals and also had this recorded, and that's available. And this is just the first of many outreach and training efforts. In addition to this, we had a stream assessment done to assess stream discharge, or Q critical. So this was done specifically for Curry's Fork. And the idea is we want to determine what our Q critical is to support those future changes to our detention basin designs. The idea is we'll change the current 2-year storm design in the design to be this Q critical. So switching one part of the design requirements to another to support our streams better. So the result from this assessment determined that supports a change of 40 to 50% of the undeveloped Q2. And I'm probably being confusing. Don't worry about it. We're going to get more specific and more detailed later on when we have Andy and Brooke. But this is consistent with the region and as well as consistent with what SD1 found. So next steps, continue to seek involvement from the design community, assess and prioritize basins for retrofitting. We want to have this integrated into future designs, as well as, like I said, utilize expertise from SD1 and sustainable streams. And then, of course, a lot of engagement, education, marketing of the Watershed Plan. I'll highlight that this year we formed our local watershed group, Friends of Curry's Fork. And we're small right now, but we're getting bigger, and I'm really excited for what's to come with this group. It's really important to have residents and people who live, work, and play in the watershed be involved in this work and have their voice heard and get a chance to know what's going on and be involved. Okay, so like I said, it was really exciting to wrap up that grant, and luckily we have more funding to keep this going. And I'm going to talk about what funding we have and what we plan to do with it. So in terms of current funding, we actually have 2 grants right now, which is really awesome and kind of crazy to manage 2 at the same time, but very exciting. So we have our 2019, so FFY, federal fiscal year. These years are just the year that Division of Water received that funding. It's just a simple way for us to keep track and know this is one grant and this is the other. So for our 2019 grant, this started in July. This funding runs through September 2023. And for federal funding, we have about $167,000. Now, as a reminder, we have to have 40% match for our federal funding. That match is not real dollars. That comes from your time right now, from volunteer time, from other outreach efforts where we can sort of calculate, put a dollar figure to that. So we need to have 40% of our total funding we're getting from Division of Water be counted as match. So we're looking at about $111,000 of match, with a total amount for this grant of about $278,000. So for our 2020 grant, so this also started this year in November, and this runs through March 2024. So a little bit more funding in this one, about $214,000 in federal, and then corresponding match numbers. So we've got funding until 2024, so over 3 years now. And then I've just broken these grants out by initiative and federal funding, just to give you a sense of where these dollars are going to be allocated. So for our on-site wastewater program, like I said, this is a partnership with the Oldham County Health Department. And for the 2019 grant, we have about $44,000. In our 2020 grant, we've got $113,000. So about a total of $157,000 for that effort. For our riparian buffer / live stakes plantings, which include workshops as well as other plantings really focused on increasing riparian buffers of our streams, we've got $10,000 for this year, $35,000 for the 2020 grant, with about $45,000 total. And that's an effort with Extension and MS4, as well as maybe some other groups. We're not completely sure yet. But you'll notice that we're always trying to do things with our partners and bring partners in and not have this be an isolated effort. Our rain garden planting, which I imagine Paul will talk about a little bit, we planted a rain garden this year, and we've got $5,000 for that, the planting and the workshop. We'll also have a rain barrel cost share program and workshop, which I believe will also be in collaboration with UDEL, and we have $3,000 for that. And then other various community engagements, we've got about $7,500 for that. This other contracted assistance, as you do something more, you get a little smarter. So I decided to put kind of this option for other, basically, as things come up. We know we want to have a pool of funding that we can pull from, so we can take advantage of opportunities and new things that we might not know about when we write the grant to be able to do. So we're thinking that this other contracted assistance is probably going to go towards these stormwater efforts, but we've got about $17,500 for that. So moving on to projects and programs, there's always a lot of things going on, and I'd love to talk about all of them, but for the sake of this and not to overwhelm everybody, we'll focus on what's happening this fall as well as what we plan to do this spring and are sort of in the works of starting to think about. So we had our Backyard Streams workshop this fall. It was originally planned for April as an in-person event. We did one in 2019 as well, kept moving it back, and then made it work in October as a virtual event. So this was a collaboration, again, with MS4 and UK Extension, targeting landowners with streams. So I did a GIS analysis recently just to see, how many people in Oldham County have a stream in their backyard. And it's not a perfect number, but basically figured out that 1 in 8 properties in the county has a stream. The same held true for just looking at Curry's Fork as well. So this really is not an insignificant number. There's a lot of people that do have a stream in their backyard and need to be equipped with the knowledge of what to do about that. So we had this workshop, we recorded it, that's available. And our main topics are stream functions and services, focusing on buffer zones, those riparian plantings, as well as stream maintenance, because stream maintenance is the responsibility of the landowner. And like I said, people need that information to know, one, that it's their responsibility, and then two, what are their options with maintaining their stream. So the second half of this Backyard Streams workshop was our live willow stakes plantings. Live willow stakes, if you don't know, they're just simply a branch you cut from a willow tree. It doesn't have to be a willow tree, but we're focusing on willow trees. And you stick it in the ground and it grows into a new tree. There's a lot of benefits to this: stream bank stabilization, shade, wildlife habitat, runoff infiltration. And it's a really awesome practice to get the community involved, and you can have whole families involved, kids involved, students involved. It's very cost effective for this effort so far. I've gone to either the Oldham Reserve or the West Moody stream restoration site and cut them myself, and then had them ready, had enough to give people to take home and plant. So it's cost effective. We can buy them at some point if we need more, but they're also very low risk. So it's, like I said, it's a branch that you stick in the ground. You generally plant a lot, so if not all of them grow, it's not as devastating as if you went and you planted, a full size or, even a 5-foot tree. What we did was we had these demos. So we had our Backyard Streams workshop, and then prioritizing people who attended the workshop, they could join us at the Oldham Reserve for these small group planting demos. We had 11 participants, and then, like I said, some people brought their kids. I had like a 5-year-old boy doing this. He was amazing. He was enjoying it. I was impressed. And then from there, I've been going to individual properties and doing this with homeowners. Things are a little bit more restricted right now, but live stakes plantings is best done in the dormant season. So between now and March is really kind of the best time. So I'm hoping once we can get out again, we'll keep this going. And we've gotten a lot of good feedback from this, and I'm really excited to keep it going. So for our rain garden project, so I got together with Paul, talk about some ideas, and he had this existing basin, and I had already written in the grant to build a rain garden. So we made it happen. We've had our installation this November. So we improved this existing basin. For some background information, UDEL is in the main stem of Curry's Fork. And we had 9 volunteers. It worked out really well because it was a couple weekends ago, and I know people were really apprehensive to kind of get out, which I understood. So trying to keep small groups and everybody safe. So we actually didn't need as many people as we had there. I ended up splitting people into 2 groups, and I really didn't need to do that. But Paul had existing volunteers there, and so they came and helped out. It's amazing how quickly people can plant things. And then moving forward, what we're going to do is we're going to have a workshop next June prioritizing people in the Curry's Fork watershed. But I believe this will probably be both an in-person and an online event. So we'll hopefully be able to get a lot of people involved in that. And then we're also hoping to have a rain barrel workshop and cost share program. This is going to broadly focus on all different kinds of homeowner practices. So our target audience will be homeowners or even renters, depending on what happens there. But we're probably going to be doing this at UDEL, I think, still figuring out logistics. I think this will probably be a live streamed event, just depending on what's going on at that point, possibly in person. And then similar to having that education component, and then from there having some type of incentive or at-home practice, we're going to have a rain barrel cost share program that will be, we've got about funding for about 50 rain barrels. And so we'll either have enough for everybody who's interested or need to do some type of drawing if we have more than 50, just to make it fair. So the cost share is going to be 60-40. It's really important that there is some type of cost that the person receiving something pays to have that incentive to then go home and install it and use it. So it's going to be 60% paid by the grant and 40% paid by the person receiving the rain barrel. So back to our on-site wastewater cost share program. So this here is our pathogen priority map. If you've been at these meetings, you've probably seen this map quite a bit. This is a watershed plan map that is prioritizing our areas for addressing bacteria in the watershed. So I mentioned that our 2016 grant, the program we completed this year, we prioritized Asher's Run, this upper Asher's Run area. And I've mentioned that I think we're going to go into the North Fork area, like the Borwick Farms area, for the next program. We haven't finalized this decision yet, and we might end up reevaluating it with what makes the most sense. And I'm going to talk about why that is. So this year we had water quality monitoring completed through the MS4 program at sites, the same sites in Curry's Fork that were done for the development of the watershed plan. I have a note here. So recalling again back to that April 2019 TAC meeting, we had a discussion to ask if, does it make sense for us to try to pay for monitoring through the grant funding we have? And there were some comments that sort of guided us to say, well, let's see if maybe that can be paid for through another means. And this just happened to work out that MS4 started doing some monitoring, and they were willing to start with Curry's Fork and do the same sites as we did before. So this might end up having us sort of recalibrate or reevaluate where we want to go with our on-site wastewater program. We're not sure yet. We haven't had a chance to review those data yet. I've got this really neat kind of old watershed planning process arrow here. So the idea that we have our watershed plan and we implement things and then we measure progress, but then from there we might want to make some adjustments. So we might be in that phase of needing to make some adjustments and just making sure we're putting our efforts and our dollars where they're going to be the most effective. So we'll figure that out, work with Division of Water, and then we're hoping to announce the next program in the spring of 2021. So a few other things in the works. Again, stormwater management, focusing on those, the design update for detention basins and maybe trying to get some retrofits in the watershed on existing detention basins. Also looking at putting in some public trails and engaging the community in this effort. There's a grant in January that I'm hoping to apply for. Potential partners for this being Oldham County Leaders Don't Litter, that Becky Zocklin runs, the Oldham Reserve being an ideal place to put some trails, as well as at the new Spring Parks project, getting Division of Water, potentially the Conservation District and Salt River Watershed Watch. So this grant requires you to have several partners. And so we're starting to look at this being a possibility with this goal of getting the community engaged, as well as actually getting some trails on the ground. Again, we're going to keep looking at this in lieu fee program to try to get some of our streams restored per this program. I think this will be a really long effort, but we want to keep that on the table as something we're looking into. And then lastly here, possibly trying to do a ponds management workshop. Similar idea to the backyard streams workshop, but focusing on ponds. There's a lot of ponds both in the watershed as well as in the area. And similar to the streams, people have them and they don't necessarily know how to maintain them and what to do with them. So looking at trying to reach the community in that way. And then lastly here, I just set the dates for these. I'm really excited. So Dave Gamstetter with Darby Resource Group up in Cincinnati, him and I talked recently, and he provides these free sessions. So we set some dates to focus on stormwater management. I'll send this out after this meeting so you all have these dates. Going to be quick 30-minute sessions focusing on stormwater. This will be January 21st, 28th, and February 4th. Will be via Zoom, and this will be open to the public, again, free of charge. And then I think I'm right at time here. So I was going to break for any, I guess I'll leave a couple minutes for questions in case there's some burning questions you all have. Feel free to unmute yourself, and then we'll move into Paul's talk. And if not, we'll move right to Paul. No questions.
Hey, Becca.
Yeah.
Are those trails going to be mixed use, or like with mountain biking, or are they hiking only?
We haven't gotten that far in the planning yet. There is interest in mountain biking trails as well. So having them be mixed use. Do you have thoughts on that, or is it just a general question?
Oh yeah, I was just wondering if it was possible to have mountain biking trails. There's a lot of interest in it, and of course there's Kimba.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know that you think that too. I think that is kind of the direction that we'd like to go, but we're in the very initial stages of doing anything. Our first step will be trying to get some funding.
Yes, the current interest is to have it be multi-use mountain bikes and hiking and other.
Anything else? And we'll have time at the end as well. All right, Paul. Well, I guess you're up. Do you want me to share with you? Let's see.
Or I can should be able to just share my screen, right?
Let's see. Why don't you try it and we'll see if it works.
Nope, it says I'm disabled.
Okay.
I need to be abled.
I wonder, does anyone know how I can do that quickly before I try to search for this?
I think it's possible to make him the host, but I'm not sure exactly where to look for that.
If you
Oh.
right click on me, you might be able to do that.
Yeah, that works. All right. Thanks, Dale. All right, you're the host now, and then we'll kick it back to Brooke after.
There we go. Oops. There we go. Now I can get to it. There we are. Hopefully that'll do the trick. All right, thanks, Becca. Well, as Becca mentioned, we had been talking about this for a while, and at the Rain Garden project, and so she asked me to just kind of review a few of the projects that we've tackled over the last few years, sort of our green infrastructure and water quality and wildlife habitat, et cetera. And so I just threw a few images. I'll just take a couple minutes for this. I know some of you have been out here to see some of it. But we're sitting on 60 acres, about half of which is developed, about half is in what we euphemistically refer to as woodlands. In quiet company and behind closed doors, we call it junk. It's mostly invasive, overgrown stuff with a smattering of nice native trees and things with trails and a few former farm ponds. But we've been working in all of our architectural projects to incorporate aspects that would help us collect, control, manage surface water runoff and habitat and reduce emissions, etc. Our first project a number of years ago was this greenhouse, which sits on the site of the original Klein nursery greenhouses. Those were too far gone when we took over the property, so those were taken down, and we added this 2,000 square foot glass house. Part of its energy footprint is offset by a solar array that we have that's on the roof of the next building off screen on the right on this image. There's 36 250 watt panels backed up by a natural gas generator when we need the backup, or when it's too cloudy and we don't have quite enough sun out. But that was the first part of this project. The other thing that we did in designing it, built it into the bank of the hill to capture a little radiant heating. And then on the backside, which is the north slope of the roof, you're now looking at the backside, the portion of the roof that faces straight north. We decided to put a green roof on it. Not a whole lot of people put green roofs on a greenhouse. Typically they're glass, but the way we use this greenhouse is really more overwintering tropical things that are out on grounds for the year. We're not doing commercial production. We do a lot of summer cutting propagation. And for that, we actually have to shade it a considerable amount. So it actually works better to have a little bit lower light level. So we worked with our architects and Rao Brothers, the greenhouse engineering firm up in Cincinnati, to basically design a tray system that is filled with crushed stone material. And those trays are then planted with unrooted cuttings of mostly sedums, a few other succulents, directly stuck into this medium. It's kind of an interesting system. This is not the best photo in the world. There's the best one I could find. If you see the trays at the bottom, the black trays are 1 foot by 2 foot dimensions, and then their height is about 3.5 inches. And that's the black portion that you see. The white portion that you see is actually corrugated plastic, sort of like yard signs that you see around town. Those are cut as temporary sides, so that when you put them all in place up on the roof, side to side, you pull out those temporary sides. You then have about a 2.5 to 3 inch continuous layer of that rooting medium, so the plants can root across trays and containers, and it knits the whole thing together. We originally thought be a great project, a great press opportunity to bring in volunteers, bring the TV news in and film a fire line of volunteers passing these trays up onto the roof. And then we picked up one of the trays and realized that they weigh about 80 pounds apiece. And so we did away with that, potential volunteer effort and had our contractor put them up. And they just made a little custom box for the skid loader to lift them up there onto the roof. And in basically one afternoon, laid all of them up there. It was a very quick and easy process. And the nice thing about this is this gives us an incredibly high insulation value on half of the roof of the greenhouse. So it helps us with energy conservation. Obviously, the green roof technology eliminates the it eliminates the sunlight degradation issue with a lot of roofing materials because it's covered by gravel and plants. And we do almost nothing in terms of maintenance. Once a year in the late spring, our crew gets up there and they pull about a dozen weeds, and that's about it. We don't fertilize it. We don't water it. The first year we watered it about 2 or 3 times just to get it set in place, but very low water use. Whatever it gets, it gets. Any runoff that we get from it gets collected, and we'll talk about where that goes in a minute. But a great little system that captures and uses some of that water that's coming, adds plant material. But one of the things we love about it is it's a green roof that's actually at ground level. People can actually go up to it and run their hands through it and get the fragrance off the plants and actually see what it does. We've got this interpreted with incorporated into our QR code system. So you can just scan a QR code with your smartphone and it'll tell you all about the green roof. So it's a nice little project, and that's been up there about 6 or 7 years now and really has been very, very low maintenance. There's another shot of it with most of the sedums in bloom. What they say about green roofs is you can plant almost anything you want on a green roof, but after 3 years, it's all sedums no matter what you start with. And that's pretty much been our experience. We have a few spring bulbs, a few other things in there, but it's probably 80 to 90% sedums. Our second project that we did in collaboration with Kentucky Waterways and also with partially with a grant from Oldham County Community Foundation. We had down below our castle about 3.5 acres of basically old pasture. Most of this land was farmed up until probably the mid 70s and then just let go. And that's what the woods consists of down below, mostly just regrowth. Some of it was continued to be mowed for hay. And we decided it was time to do something with this. So we spent 3 years basically bombing the entire thing to get rid of Johnson grass and as much curly dock as we possibly could, because it was pretty heavily. We did some surveys and it was about 70 to 80% invasive exotic species that had seeded in there over the years. The only way to get rid of that was to kill it all off. So we spent 1 year working with Margaret Shea at Drop Seed Nursery, killed off everything, removed some of the fence lines. I don't know if you all can see my cursor, but just above mid height on this image, you can see signs of an old fence line. We removed the old fence line to open up another field, about another acre in the distance, to give us a total of about 3.5 acres. We worked with Margaret. She came in 2 years ago in December, just about this time of year, 2 years ago, and did a seed planting of a pretty broad mix of about 30 species. There are some areas out here that are a little moister than others, some a little drier. Rather than trying to target specific seed mixes for specific areas, we just made one mix, seeded it throughout the whole thing, and then just let everything have at it. Last year, 2019, we kept it mowed at about a 10 to 12 inch height to encourage deeper root growth. And then 2020 was the first year we let it go, and it turned out to be quite nice. We had a pretty good mix of things pop up, all your typicals. Certainly there's still Queen Anne's lace. There's still some curly dock. We did some hand removal of some Johnson grass. But we pretty quickly flipped it from, 80% invasive, 20 native, to it's probably reversed now, 80% native and a smaller component, 10-20% exotics that we'll continue to work on over the next few years, or the next forever, really, to keep the most of the exotics from seeding in. But it was a pretty fantastic view this summer. We had Margaret back out this summer a couple times to walk it, and she was very pleased with the seed germination and the take that we got. So pretty happy with it. There's another nice shot of our Queen Anne's lace below the castle. But a huge difference. And we did some, with all of our virtual programming this year, we did walks down through there. We did monarch butterfly programs. We did all kinds of programs, and we'll obviously do a lot more. So that's been a really nice and pretty low cost project. And then on to our last one. I just have a couple images of this one, but Becca was out walking the grounds a while ago, and below one of our large architectural projects, we just had what the architect and engineer on the project referred to as a detention basin, which really was just a low hole in the ground with no engineering or planning that went into it. And we really had planned to do something with it. And so Becca was happy to come on board and help us with this project, to turn it into, enlarge it a whole lot and turn it into a large rain garden. And what you can't see on this image, I should have thrown in an overhead shot, an aerial shot. But as we've developed a number of our building projects on the grounds, we've pretty much intentionally funneled all of the runoff from gutters, from hard surface, ground surface, in one direction, just following the contours of the land, figuring at some point we'll figure out how to use all of this water, and the best thing we could do in the short term is get it all moving in the same direction. And so fortunately we were able to get this enlarged to, I think it ended up to be about 20 by 50 foot rain garden. We did all the work in-house. Our nursery manager, Jacob Stidham, grew just about all the plants here in our nursery. They rented a piece of equipment, and we did the earthwork here. Most of the piping was already in place, just needed to be extended in a few places. And then, as Becca said, we had a big planting day that happened to coincide with one of our Saturday morning volunteer work days, where Becca worked with Laura Ryan, who's our volunteer coordinator, and they coordinated volunteers, and we got it finished up and planted and mulched and all set in place. In the back right, you see the old fence line there. That fence is now gone. That's the upper portion of that pollinator meadow that we put in. And next spring, we'll enlarge that and bring it up right up to the back of the rain garden so that it's all one continuous piece. So it's worked out to be quite nice, and it'll be a great little interpretive space as well. The last thing we have left to do is this winter and next year, we want to do some permanent signage throughout the pollinator meadow and the rain garden. Here's just an aerial shot to give you an idea. Of course, it had to rain a couple of days before the planting. So being ingenious, Sadie and Jacob brought out the plastic portable greenhouse benches, bench tops out of one of our hoop houses, and used those as planting platforms. But this lower left outlet that pours into it comes from the greenhouse and a number of other structures. This source right here is coming right off the big event pavilion that's right adjacent to this. So one of the other really nice things about this project is it sits, both the pollinator meadow and the rain garden sit right around the perimeter of our largest event space that we rent for weddings and we have for fundraisers, summer concerts. So it'll get a ton of visibility from the general public. So couldn't have picked a better spot for it. And there, I think Becca showed this image earlier. It's some of the volunteers, I think a couple of our interns working on it as well. The other thing right back here, the house in the background, that's our intern house. So we've got several sets of eyes on it every day so they can keep tabs on it. So now that it's in place and has been well watered this fall with plenty of rain, we'll work with Becca and we'll pull off a few workshops for homeowners, gardeners, anybody else who wants information. Last thing I'll mention is in collecting a little more information on this, had a conversation with our friends up at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanic Garden up in Cincy. They've got a very extensive rain garden program. And a couple of years ago, they got together with Ohio State Extension and a few other organizations up in that area and put together a very nice rain garden booklet, a guide for homeowners and developers. And they very much would like to update it and make it more regional, and have asked us if we'd be interested in working with them. So that'll be fun. And I'm sure we'll get some of you all involved with that process. It'd be nice to have a nice regional guide for the whole area. So that's about it. I'm happy to take any questions. And obviously, anytime you want to come see it, it's right in our back service entrance.
Thanks, Paul. And we are smiling in this picture, I swear. Does anyone have any questions for Paul?
Hey, Paul, this is Andy Amon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So the age-old question of green roofs, and actually retrofitting an existing building, was there a structural engineering analysis of the building? Did you have to do any reinforcing, or how did that look?
Yeah, it was interesting doing that. When I talked to the Rao Brothers folks, there were two things we wanted to do. One was we wanted to put the green roof up there, which obviously adds a lot of weight. The other is we had our architects work with them because they've helped us with all of our architectural design. And the greenhouse, as most structures like that would have, had a whole series of horizontal purlins overhead that the architects hated. They wanted to have much more of an open cathedral feel in the greenhouse. So we said, okay, to the Rao Brothers, we said, okay, we want to add about 150 pounds per square foot to the roof, and we want to take away the horizontal purlins from the structure. Can you do that for us? And he actually, it was funny, he got back to me and he said, our engineers are all pumped because they never get to do fun stuff like this. So honestly, all they did was upsize most of the structural pieces, about 10%. They were able to get rid of those purlins and hold the weight on the roof without any trouble at all. So it's been rock solid. It's done really well. We did have one very large long-term donor who was in, when they were in the process of construction, he was in kind of poking his nose through it because he's an engineer and is interested in that kind of thing. And he was very, very concerned about it not being able to hold the weight. So I got back in touch with Rao Brothers, and they said, my guys said they would be willing to have their kids sleep under this thing with 4 feet of snow on it. But we know what it's like sometimes when you've got important donors. So we'll be happy to come in and put a couple of extra braces in that it doesn't really need, so that it makes everybody happy.
So if you're looking for another roof to do that on, my house, I volunteer my house here in Northern Kentucky. That was absolutely beautiful and stunning. That was an amazing job. That was
a fun project, and we're looking for other opportunities to do another one on the grounds here, because it's a great thing to do. It wasn't too difficult to do, and people just love it. And I think people are learning a lot just by being able to see it in person.
Any other comments or questions for Paul?
And it has filled with water several times and drained away on its own sweet time. So it's actually doing what it's supposed to. I will add one other quick thing, Becca.
Sure.
We're also working with John Stewart and the folks at Encompass on a much bigger surface water management project, because our nursery is growing significantly and we need a whole lot more water for irrigation, because right now we're on city water for the nursery. So they're in the process of we just finished doing all the calculations on how much water we can collect from all of our impervious surfaces, mapped out best potential places for capture and holding. And they just had somebody out to do soil depth soundings in about 7 or 8 different places, so we can figure out the best place to hold and reuse as much of that water as possible.
That sounds great. We'll definitely want to keep updated on that as you move forward. Okay, well, thanks, Paul. I guess, let's see, do I have to take back controls here? Or I guess you just, let's see. We're gonna go on to Brooke and Andy. Let's see. So Brooke and Andy, I'll make you guys the host. Does that work?
Let's try it. Oh, hold on here. Try again. It says it's disabled participant screen sharing. Give it a second. We'll see if it works. Well,
Let's see. Paul, I think you're still the host here.
I am. Let's see. I'm going.
I wish I was
to-
more helpful to say exactly what to do.
All right. I'm going to change it to you.
Okay.
I think I have to throw it back to you. I don't think I can make somebody else.
Oh, yep, there we go.
All right.
And now I'll make Brooke the host here. There you go. So Jim Silliman and I had a conversation with Brooke and Andy a few weeks ago. They've gone through the process, like I said, that we're starting to eventually get updates to our detention basin design requirements. And I said, we've got to have this discussion at our TAC meeting. So they graciously said they would present. And whenever you all are ready.
great. Thanks, Becca. So Andy and I are socially distanced in one of our conference rooms today, so we can kind of tackle this together. Can you all see the slide on your screen, our title slide?
Yep.
Okay, great. So thanks again for inviting us. Like Becca said, we had a great conversation a little over a month ago. Andy and I said it was fun kind of walking down memory lane, telling our overall story on all of this. So we're going to kind of step through that today. And I'll try to keep it relatively brief so we've got time for questions, but also we've got our contact information in here. So if anyone has follow-up questions that they don't get to ask today or think about it later, feel free to shoot us an email, or if there's any components that you'd like us to talk about in more detail in the future, let me know. It may be somebody else here who has a little bit more experience on, certain components, so we could bring them into the conversation as well. So I will get started. So to give you kind of a general idea of where Sanitation District Number 1, SD1, as we call it, abbreviated, is located. We're in northern Kentucky. So Boone, Kenton, and Campbell counties up here in this circled yellow area at the tip of the state is our service area. So we're a regional wastewater and stormwater utility. Regarding our wastewater services, we have over 300,000 customers, and then just a few less than that on our stormwater side. So we provide that service across these 3 counties of northern Kentucky. With our stormwater service area, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about optimizing our stormwater regulations today in relation to Q critical. So the area that serves is what you see highlighted in green. So similarly to Oldham County, we have a MS4 permit that we have to comply with the state of Kentucky. And with that, it's focused on those urbanized areas within those 3 counties. So that is, again, kind of this green shaded area of the 3 counties. To give you an idea of kind of the infrastructure component of it, it's about, it's over 400 miles of pipe and about 32,000 structures. So that's kind of the hard infrastructure components of the public MS4 system that we manage with the stormwater program. And then for the phase 2 compliance with all of the minimum control measures, everything from education to good housekeeping and pollution control, we do that work for 29 cities and the unincorporated areas within these green shaded components of the counties. So instead of all of these individual municipalities having separate MS4 permits, we have that regional permit, and we kind of serve as the lead on that with assistance from all of those co-permittees. So that's just kind of us in a nutshell of how we're structured. So today what we're going to talk about is how we got to our Q critical approach of optimizing stormwater in this area. And I know Dr. Bob Holly with Sustainable Streams spoke to you all a while back. And I went and watched that recorded presentation, and does an amazing job of kind of explaining the science behind all of this and the development of it. And SD1 worked very closely with Sustainable Streams through all of this development. So I think I saw that Bob was on this call today. So Bob, if I misspeak about anything, feel free to unmute yourself and interject. But what happened is, I think like a lot of communities, we were seeing major impacts in our service area due to stormwater runoff and hydromodification. So I think as Bob explained to you previously, Q critical is essentially that threshold of that flow in the stream where you start to see the materials within that stream suspended and moving. And as a result of that, where you get the bank failures and habitat degradation. And then that was, of course, an issue to us, the habitat and the aquatic life impacts. But beyond that, we were seeing such a huge impact to our infrastructure and our property in this area. And I think that's, something that's noticed across the country. And it was having an impact on our utilities. Like this highlights a telephone or an electric pole that sits along one of our stream banks. And like a lot of areas in Kentucky, especially northern Kentucky, where we have a lot of hills, a lot of our flat area is along our stream channels. And so that's where a lot of our utilities run. So everything from, our electrical utilities, but for us as a stormwater and wastewater entity, it's a little bit hard maybe to see in this bottom picture, but this is actually a manhole that's sitting right here. That was not designed to be in the middle of that stream. This stream widened over time, and now we have sanitary infrastructure that is getting exposed. And when you have a break, not only do you have the concerns of the impacts in that stream, but those are costly fixes. So with all of this happening within our service area, we were seeing failures within roadways due to stream bank erosion, along bridge footings, significant loss to public and private property. So beyond just the aquatic life impacts, this was a real concern for us as a community, for both the infrastructure that we had to manage and for our stakeholders and our customers' property and infrastructure as well. So, with these problems, we had to figure out, well, how do we solve this? And as Bob, I think the next few slides that I'm going to go through are ones that were presented previously, but just to kind of remind us why we're here. When Sustainable Streams was looking at this with us, SD1 had collected years of data, really trying to figure out, okay, what's the cause of this problem? And what we found is that with our existing flood protection controls, so kind of the pre and post matching that you see through a lot of stormwater management quantity controls, we were managing these larger storm events. And with the addition of the water quality volume that was required with the MS4 permit, we started to get at a little bit of the smaller storms, of just a portion of those. But overall, looking at those typical storms that we saw here in northern Kentucky throughout the year, a large portion of those smaller storms were not being managed by our stormwater regulations and our stormwater controls in place. And not only that, I think this is another slide that Bob probably showed you, those smaller storm events, which you see here in this green area with our conventional controls, our pre and post peak matching, what this dash line is right here on this graph is that Q critical. They were actually prolonging the time that that flow was above that Q critical rate in our streams. So eating away even more at those banks, our stream channels, and causing even additional problems. So we knew that to tackle this through all of this data collection, the work with sustainable streams, really trying to get a handle on the problem in our area, that we were going to have to figure out how to manage those smaller storms, those typical 2 years and smaller storms that we saw in our area, so that that post-development peak was below that Q critical threshold, so that we weren't continuing to have these impacts on stream channels with our new development. And with that, what was found, again, we have our water quality volume that we did not need to change. Our larger storm events that we have managing, the quantity and the flood controls, those didn't need to change. However, we needed to look at those smaller storms. We needed to make an adjustment for those 2-year storm events so that the maximum discharge from that was less than or equal to that 0.4 CFS per acre of drainage area. So this is the piece that we had to focus on with managing stormwater, so we weren't exceeding those critical flows in a way that were detrimental to our community and our infrastructure for new development. So we got to that point, we knew what we needed to do. Luckily, here at SD1, we have a department where we have, very talented biologists and other folks in our engineering groups that saw this was a problem, had been collecting a lot of data with the work with sustainable streams, were able to come to this. So we had an answer. Now we had to figure out, how do we get this implemented? So one thing we needed to look at is, well, how do you do it? And through some stormwater modeling, talking with other engineers, again, working with sustainable streams, we found that this didn't have to be a big change. Really, with a lot of our existing detention and our retention facilities, it's just making some modification to these outlet control structures so that low flow orifice, instead of having it larger where those smaller storms are just blowing right through, decreasing that size and then making some changes to those other windows. So we're managing those smaller storm events to that critical flow. And with that, there were some concerns. Okay, if we've got this lower or we've got this smaller low flow orifice, then how do we maintain that? Is this going to get clogged? Are we going to have problems there? So we also came up with a standard design that allows for basically a perforated PVC pipe that connects to that low flow orifice that is then encased in rocks. So instead of you getting, some leaves compacted here and the basin not functioning anymore, it's a little bit more forgiving and easier to maintain. So again, we know what the solution is. Let's start figuring out we know what the problem is. We know what our target is. Let's start figuring out how we engineer that solution to get to that goal. So with that, then we had to really make sure people understood what we were talking about and these issues that we were dealing with. And it's not like we figured all this stuff out and then we started educating the public. This education and outreach was going on basically through the entire process. So it was a series of presentations and workshops for multiple stakeholder groups that included, at large, the engineering community, because these are the folks that are designing the stormwater management for these new developments. We knew we had to share this information with them, get their input and their buy-in to move in this direction. So we did this through our Northern Kentucky Society of Professional Engineers. They meet regularly. SD1 staff, as well as Sustainable Streams, did multiple presentations to them in this area. And then Andy and his group are great with working with all of our permit applicants for new development during that kind of plan review process to talk to them about these designs as well. So a lot of it went on not only at kind of the larger conceptual level, but also at that site plan review. And the development community, this was going to be the stakeholder that was going to be potentially impacted first due to these changes in our requirements. So again, we wanted to make sure we were talking to them before we fully implemented some of this, and also to get their feedback. So that included the Building Industry Association, which had been the Home Builders Association of Northern Kentucky. And a subgroup within that is they have a land development council. So it's a mix of developers and engineers that meet regularly. And again, it was a really good resource for us. A group of folks that we needed to talk to. So we went to them and we talked to them at multiple stages. Also, our co-permittees, like I mentioned before, we serve 29 cities and 3 counties in this area. We needed to make sure that the city and county officials were on board as well. And honestly, a lot of those infrastructure impacts that we were seeing up front, they were bringing that stuff to us. You know, they were the ones that had landowners and property owners calling them at their planning and zoning offices, you know, saying, hey, I've got some major issues. This stream used to be this small kind of meandering stream in my backyard, and now it's, you know, gonna eat my driveway and my garage. So they were seeing this firsthand. They knew it was a problem. And then also our citizens. So we have a stormwater advisory committee here that we meet with at least annually. A great resource for us, not only to share information, but to get a lot of feedback and kind of review from as well. And then we're lucky, just like Oldham County has the great Curry's Fork Watershed group, we have multiple watershed groups up here as well with watershed plans. And that includes Bank Lick and Gunpowder and Wolper. So they were amazing resources that also collected a lot of data for us, provided information, and were wonderful partners. And again, big proponents of moving forward with this. And then beyond that, it was also getting this message out at local, state, and national conferences and other places too. So it wasn't just us kind of talking to ourselves in our isolated Northern Kentucky area, but getting this information out there and getting feedback from all of it. And again, you know, working with Sustainable Streams, Bob's presented so much of this information at various conferences and other venues that's really helped us learn more too and get feedback from just outside of our area. So then from there, before we made it an actual requirement, we were like, okay, let's just start asking folks to do this. If it's truly just some minor modifications and adjustments with their outlet control structures, this should be something that they can start implementing. So again, Andy's team was great with, you know, kind of getting in at that permit review level and during the plan review and just asking design engineers, hey, can you make some minor modifications to your design so we're achieving this Q critical target? And through that process, I guess it went on for a little over a year or so when we were doing that, we had over 85% of the projects that were coming in at that time that made that adjustment, even without it being a requirement. And that was both on the residential and non-residential side. So that was pretty eye-opening to us. It's like, you know, if people are able to do this without it even being a requirement, even when they're already into the development phases of these projects, this is something that's achievable. We can do this. And then in addition to that, we also had a 40% stormwater credit for the non-residential properties. We have a stormwater credit policy that's been in place for a number of years here. And essentially you can do certain items and it will result in a reduction of your stormwater bill. So by meeting the Q critical target, you could get up to 40% off of your stormwater bill. And we thought that this would be a pretty big seller for especially some of these larger commercial developments. And it was to some, but what we found is that even, you know, with a lot of these projects that were coming in that they had some interest in them, there were a lot that still didn't apply for the credit. So they were doing it with or without this, which was again encouraging to us. So from that stage, then we said, okay, we need to make this a requirement. You know, we're ready to transition into that component. So with our existing rules and regulations at that time, and when I say rules and regulations, SD1's a little different regarding an MS4 than like Oldham County. Since we are a special district, we're a public utility, we serve a lot of different cities and counties. We can't pass things through an ordinance like a county or a city would. So we have our stormwater rules and regulations, which essentially outline all the requirements that pertain to stormwater management. And this is kind of our legally, gives us the legal authority to implement and enforce these requirements. So that's what I mean by our rules and regulations. So we already had a section in there that said that additional controls or localized restrictions could be placed on specific sites as deemed necessary by SD1. And upon some further legal review of that, it was determined that instead of having to completely change these rules and regulations, we could point to that section, and that would give us the authority to require the Q critical requirement for new development sites. So what we did is we put together a letter, again, with a lot of help from Sustainable Streams, outlining the why we needed to do it, that it was going to be a requirement as of October of 2015. And again, that table that was showing exactly what we were asking for in the change. Not everything, just the one component. So the letter went out in July of 2015 with the requirement taking effect October 2015. And we said, hey, if you've got questions or feedback, let us know. During that time, we also presented to the Northern Kentucky Society of Professional Engineers again, to our board of directors. We did get some comments back from the Home Builders Association at that time, but we did a response to all of those. Andy talked to them directly about that. And I think other than that, maybe just a few minor questions from a couple of engineering firms, but not a lot of pushback or feedback at that time. So October 2015, it was a requirement. So all new development that was coming in, so greater, an acre or greater, they were now having to manage for that Q critical target for that 2 year and those smaller storm events, which, we were very pleased that we had that on the books and could put that into place. And I think too, it was a help to have it a requirement, because then we weren't asking engineers to redesign things on projects. They knew going right into it, this was something that was going to have to happen. And then the other big thing that I think was helpful as well to really, I guess, put at ease some folks that may have had some concerns about this, is that in our rules and regulations, we also have a variance and waiver process. So we said, hey, if it's a specific site where this isn't something that is achievable, that it's going to increase, or it's going to have a very large expense and increase in cost for your stormwater management, we have the ability to do a variance or potentially waive it. And I think that was a big help too, knowing that there's some flexibility. Now we've had to do this, I'd probably say less than 5 times throughout all of this. It hasn't been much, but it's still something that's there. And I think that was an important thing that we had, so we had that flexibility if needed. So some of the big lessons learned throughout the process, again, the education and outreach was huge. I think the fact that Andy's group, our local engineers with the help of Sustainable Streams, doing all of that initial education and outreach, providing that information along the way as we were collecting the data, as we were learning things, really helped build that support. And we got a lot of good feedback that helped direct us in how we were going to move forward. So that was key for us. And that went on for many, many years. It helped us really build that support. Also local examples, like I mentioned before, we've got some great watershed groups up here, and they were already implementing some projects that were achieving Q critical, and that was a great testing ground for us. Things we could point to. It's like, we're not just making this up. We've got examples of this and it works. So that was very, very helpful. And again, they were providing a lot of great data for us as well. The record drawings and as-built for permitted basins. And this has been something that we've learned is important on both ends. One, for the installation, I showed you that standard detail earlier. What we were finding is people were installing those, but maybe they weren't including or putting the right kind of seal in around that low flow orifice or along the concrete connections within that outlet control structure. So it wasn't really functioning as designed. So having those record drawings and those as-built required during that notice of termination process, we found was very important to make sure that it just didn't look good on paper, but it was actually implemented properly in the field. And then also we're starting to really try to tackle detention basin retrofits now. And what we found is there are some basins that were built in the past that, although they were supposed to be a certain size, they were not implemented that way. So in some cases, smaller than what we expected, which causes some issues on the retrofit side. So all in all, a very important component of the permitting process. Clear and specific requirements. We recently in 2020 did a full review and updates to our rules and regulations. So now that Q critical requirement is specifically spelled out in our rules and regulations. And based on some of the feedback we've had from our local engineers and just working through the process over the years, we've added some additional details to that requirement just to make it a little bit clearer to the folks that are out there designing the stormwater infrastructure. And also updating that standard detail, again, kind of calling out some of those areas that we saw were problematic with the installation, like calling the attention, hey, don't forget to do this. And it helps our inspectors too when they go out and do the installation inspections on these. And then also another thing too that we found, we've got a lot of folks that use the extended detention basin for stormwater management up here. And the great thing about it that we've seen is that it can help achieve both that water quality volume, your Q critical, as well as your quantity control, all within the same BMP. So that's been a very popular BMP. And because of that, we're going to be updating our BMP manual soon. And when we do that, the extended detention is something that we're really going to focus on. Make sure that we're providing lots of good information there because it has become a very popular BMP. Some updates, like I mentioned before, we updated our rules and regulations. That is on our website, so you can find that. On our website, I think section 500 is where we have the specifics about our Q critical requirement. We also updated our credit policy, so now that it's a requirement, we've included some additional credits to kind of go above and beyond. So when you're managing to that Q critical level to a 5-year, 10-year event, kind of really going above and beyond what we're asking, we're providing incentives for that now too. So we can really try to push that forward, as well as retrofits to existing basins can get that too. Capital projects, so what we're building, we're trying to make sure that we're meeting those requirements, as well as doing better planning to look for those key areas within our service area where we need to focus on detention or detention retrofits. Because again, this requirement applies to new development, which is great, but we've got a lot of kind of, the sins of the past that we need to address as well. So that's going to take larger planning and really trying to do some key projects based on those, kind of that watershed approach. So that goes along with our continued analysis and planning, continuing to look at the data, to look at the areas that we need to target, where we need to do a little bit more, and how we can, again, get back to managing those impacts. So we have both better aquatic habitat and improvements for aquatic life, but also so we're not having such impacts on our infrastructure. And like I mentioned before, detention basin retrofits are a big focus we have right now. Working on a project where we're looking at all of the existing detention basins across our service area and identifying those that are really good retrofit candidates. So places that can have a big in-stream impact or have the ability for some simple retrofits. And in some cases, that's as simple as like what you see here. This was done by our Banquet Creek Watershed. It was an existing basin with an outlet control structure that you see in the bottom, that larger low flow pipe. They had a local engineering firm do some design work, just design this plate, which makes that a little bit smaller. And then a contractor went out and just drilled that directly to the structure. So something as simple as a plate, we're talking a couple $1,000, big impact. Or more advanced, where we have some real-time controls that we're putting on some of our regional basins. You can see the solar panel here, this unit that actually controls that smaller outlet control or the low flow orifice, which is going to base that on rain events that are going to be coming through. So real-time controls, which gives you a little bit more flexibility with the existing footprint that you have. So kind of looking at all of those things right now. So again, trying to address some of those problems that have existed for many, many years with the existing infrastructure that we have. So flew through that, lots of information, but that's our contact. And Andy, sorry, I didn't even let you get in there, but but Andy is an amazing wealth of information. He's been working with our permitted entities for years and years, has a lot of really good firsthand experience with this on the regulatory side as well. So I guess Becca or Jim, did we leave anything out that you wanted us to cover?
Not, I mean, I could talk about this for another hour, but no, that was amazing. Does anybody have any questions for Brooke or Andy or comments?
Well, I guess, and I'll spare everyone the technical background we've had or all the conversations we've had. I appreciate all your help in educating us on this and telling us your story. I think maybe and another great way to we'll say sell this would be if you've just got some success stories, actually, you know, do you have on the ground evidence of the improvements, the lack of erosion in some of those critical areas that you can share?
Yeah, and I know we don't have a lot of time right now, and if this is something that would be of interest to this group, maybe it's a presentation we can do at a future meeting. But Matt Wooten, one of our lead biologists here with SD1, has done some data collection at the Toyota retrofit site that I believe Bob had presented about previously, with some really impressive aquatic life kind of results out there. It's been a really interesting infield lab for us. So I'm sure he would be happy to present about that. And, you know, we're trying to continue to collect that data throughout our watersheds, but you know, that's a good example there where we're actually seeing in-stream improvement. And yeah, we would be happy to talk a little bit more on that end of things too, maybe in another presentation if you think that would be a good fit for the group.
Sure, thank you.